Some ancient structures are so advanced, mysterious, or seemingly out of place that they continue to baffle scientists. They were built with incredible precision and techniques that defy their time. Here are 15 ancient structures that are still baffling scientists. Number 15. The Longyu Caves in China. The Longyu Caves in Zhejiang Province in China were discovered in 1992 by a group of villagers who decided to pump water out of a local pond. And to everyone's surprise, they found an extensive network of enormous hand-carved caverns. Thought to have been created around 2,000 years ago and covering an area of around 320,000 square feet, these caves have at least 24 separate chambers, each with smooth walls, symmetrical columns, and perfect ceilings that are covered in chisel marks. Some of the caverns almost reach 100 feet, and the scale is simply enormous, with estimates suggesting that as much as 35 million cubic feet were removed to create them. Strangely though, there's no signs of where this material was taken, so it's not clear why the caves were carved in that place, and there aren't any clues about who did it either. Those chisel marks that were left in the rock are pretty surprising too, because they suggest that a meticulous technique was used, and it would have needed thousands of workers. Well, there isn't, though, any mention of such a massive workforce in historical documents from this Qin or Han dynasties, which are the periods that they're usually linked to. Whether they were storage facilities, places of worship, or something even more important, we may never know. But it makes you wonder what else may be hidden just beneath the surface across China, and whether these were just one of a series of structures by a long-forgotten civilization. Number 14. The Cahokia Mounds in Illinois. The Cahokia Mounds in the United States are the remains of the largest and most sophisticated pre-Columbian city that's north of Mexico. They were built by the Mississippian culture at its peak between 1050 and 1350. Cahokia was a large urban center with a population of as many as 20,000 people, which would have made it one of the largest cities in the world at that time. The site today has around 80 surviving earthen mounds, but archaeologists believe there were originally at least 120. These mounds are thought to have served various purposes, like ceremonial activities and residential structures. But since so much of the original structures have long gone, it's impossible to know for certain. The largest of them, known as Monk's Mound, is about 100 feet high and covers an area of roughly 14 acres, making it the largest earthen structure in North America. But what we do know is that Cahokia was a highly organized society with a complex political and religious system. The city's layout was carefully planned, featuring plazas, wooden palisades, and a system of roads, and a wood henge, which were a series of large wooden posts that were arranged in circles and were possibly used as an astronomical calendar. The city would have provided food from farming, with maize or corn being the primary crop, and this would have helped with trade in distant regions too. Archaeological discoveries have shown that Cahokia's influence stretched across much of the southeastern and midwestern United States, with trade networks bringing in goods like shells from the Gulf of Mexico, copper from the Great Lakes, and obsidian from the Rocky Mountains. There's still a lot we don't know about life here, though, and perhaps the biggest mystery of all is why it was eventually abandoned. By the time European explorers arrived in the 17th century, there was no one left at all, with no clues about why they had gone or where they went. Number 13. The Rapa Nui Moai on Easter Island. They're probably some of the most famous ancient structures anywhere in the world, but even though plenty of people have dedicated their careers to uncovering the truth about the Moai statues on Easter Island, there's still a lot that doesn't make much sense. The island, which is known to locals as Rapa Nui, is in a remote region of the Pacific Ocean, and it's a territory of Chile. The land here is covered by almost 1,000 statues, which are all huge stone figures that were created by the Rapa Nui people between the years 1250 and 1500. Quite why they dedicated themselves to building them, how they did it, and the reason for them being in such a hard-to-reach place is not fully understood though, and we may never find out the truth. The Moai were sculpted from volcanic tuff, which is a relatively soft rock that came from one of the island's quarries. Most range between 13 and 33 feet, that's about 4 and 10 meters tall, with some reaching more than double that, and they weigh over 80 tons. These statues usually have elongated faces, deep-set eyes, prominent noses, and heavy brows, with their torsos going down as far as the upper thighs. Some were also given large cylindrical stone hats known as pukao, which were made from red scoria stone. It's from a different quarry. Quite how the Rapa Nui people transported the figures from the quarry to their final positions is one of the biggest mysteries, and it's possible that they were walked into place by keeping them upright and then rocking them from side to side. By the time the European explorers arrived in the 18th century, though, all that was left were the statues, many of which had been toppled over, and there was certainly no one willing to reveal the secrets of the Moai. Number 12. The Nazca Lines in Peru. Set across the Nazca Desert of southern Peru, there are a series of massive geoglyphs known as the Nazca Lines that were carved into the desert floor between about 500 BC and 500 AD. They're spread across a region of nearly 386 square miles, or just over 1,000 square kilometers, and they form a range of shapes, including geometric patterns, animals, plants, and humanoid figures, some of which are individually at least 1,000 feet or about 300 meters long. Their huge size means that they're best viewed from the air, but since this wasn't possible at the time when they were made, it's not clear why or how they were created. The lines were made by removing the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated stones that cover the desert's surface and exposing the lighter-colored earth beneath. Due to the dry climate here, little wind, and stable conditions, these geoglyphs have remained extremely well preserved for over 2,000 years, so what we see today is very much how they would have originally looked. Among the most famous of them are the hummingbird, the monkey, the spider, and the condor, each of which was drawn with a surprising level of precision. But one of the strangest figures is called the astronaut. It looks like a human with an oversized head and a raised hand, which has led to suggestions that there may have been extraterrestrial involvement. While there's no scientific evidence supporting ideas like these, though, there's still confusion about how an ancient civilization, without modern tools, was able to design and carve them. Recent studies, though, have suggested that the Nazca Lines may have been connected to water rituals, as the Nazca people relied on an advanced system of underground aqueducts for survival. Some geoglyphs appear to line up with sources of water, so may have been central to ceremonies to try to encourage rainfall in the desert. But with no written records from the time, we may never truly know what they were. Number 11. The Goseck Circle in Germany. The Goseck Circle in Saxony-Anhalt, Germany, is one of the oldest known solar observatories in the world, dating back to almost 5,000 years ago. This Neolithic structure was first discovered in 1991, and it was excavated in the early 2000s to reveal a series of concentric circular ditches, wooden palisades, and precisely aligned entrances. In all, the structure is about 246 feet in diameter, and it's made up of a number of rings, including an outer ditch, an inner ditch, and wooden enclosures. Two openings in the palisade almost perfectly align with the sunrise and sunset on the winter solstice, and this is what led to researchers to believe that the site functioned as a calendar of sorts. The discovery of bones in the site further suggests that the circles may have also been used for ritualistic purposes and was likely a central structure for religious ceremonies. But what's surprising about this site, though, is that it's far older than other well-known solar calendars in Europe and suggests that early societies had a shared knowledge of astronomy and construction techniques. This is where the mystery of the site comes in too, as it wasn't known before the discovery of the Goseck Circle that there were people around at that time who were advanced enough to have built it. Whether they originally came from the region or moved there from somewhere else, we probably won't ever know that. And without any further evidence, we probably won't find out for certain exactly what the site was used for, or how important it truly was to them. Number 10. The Asuka Megaliths in Japan. The Asuka Megaliths, which can be found in the Asuka region of the Nara Prefecture in Japan, are the most mysterious ancient stone structures in the country. They're a series of huge carved rock formations that date back to Japan's Asuka period, between the years 538 and 710, which was a time when the region was one of the centers of early Japanese civilization. While they're well-known monuments, their mysterious origin, unclear purpose, and the advanced stone-cutting techniques that were used in their construction means that no one's sure how or why they were created. One of the most famous is known as the Masuda no Iwafune, or the Rock Ship of Masuda, which measures around 36 feet long, 26 feet wide, and about 15 feet high. And it's thought to weigh as much as 800 tons. Amazingly, it was carved from a single piece of granite and has a flat top with two square holes cut into it. This unusual shape has led to various theories about what it was for, ranging from being an unfinished ceremonial chamber to it being an ancient astronomical observatory that was used to track the movement of celestial bodies. Another of the more famous sites here is Sakafune Ishi, which is a large stone slab with channels and basins that have been carved into it. Seemingly, it's designed for liquid to pour along it. Theories about its use include it being for ritual purification or even the production of sake. What is certain, though, is that the precision of the carvings shows a high level of craftsmanship. There are many more strange megaliths in the region, each with their own mysteries, and adding to the confusion about them is the complete lack of historical records about their construction. They aren't, for example, anything like the traditional Shinto or Buddhist temple structures or the kofun, the ceremonial mounds that are found elsewhere in Japan. This has led to the suggestion about possible influences from outside Japan, and that the Asuka megaliths are instead linked to ancient civilizations from China, Korea, or even further afield. It is possible, too, that they were created by an unknown culture that lived there before the Asuka period, but there's no evidence to support that theory. So for now, scientists are unable to give a definitive answer until further excavations find conclusive proof. Number 9. The Khat Shabib, Jordan. The Khat Shabib is a vast stone wall that stretches across Jordan, and it's one of the least understood structures in all of the Middle East. Thought to be about 93 miles long, it's a low-lying wall that weaves its way through the landscape and often disappears and then reappears again. Rather than being a tall fortification like the other ancient walls usually are, the Khat Shabib is typically only about 3 feet or a meter high and about the same wide, making its purpose less than obvious. Surprisingly, it's been completely forgotten about until recently as of 1948, when British archaeologist Sir Alec Kirkbride was flying over Jordan and spotted a strange formation across the region. Carbon dating and pottery fragments that have been found on the wall show that it dates back as far as the Nabatean period, more than 2,100 years ago. But unlike other well-known ancient walls, this wouldn't have been enough to act as a defensive barrier. There also haven't been any major fortifications, guard towers, or military outposts discovered along it, so it must have had an entirely different purpose. One leading theory is that the wall was a territorial boundary, possibly showing the separation of land between different groups. The region where Khat Shabab is located has been home to settled farming communities and nomadic Bedouin tribes for thousands of years, and it's possible that the structure was built to show the borders for grazing lands. Another possibility is that the wall was a guide for travelers and traders and was there to help them find their way across the desert. Jordan was a particularly important part of the ancient trade network, particularly along routes that connected Arabia, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean. And if the wall was a form of a directional marker, it may have been an early attempt to create a consistent path for merchants. This implies that it was built over a longer period of time rather than as one big project, and it may have taken generations to complete. Recent surveys have now found over 100 small structures alongside the wall, including a series of stone enclosures that could have been temporary shelters for travelers, outposts for herders, or homes for people who looked after the wall. There are, though, no inscriptions or written records about Khat Shabib, so it's difficult to know who built it, let alone why they did it. Number 8. Çatalhöyük, Turkey. Çatalhöyük in central Turkey is one of the world's oldest archaeological sites that has revealed a huge amount about early human settlement and social organization. Dating back to around 7500 BC, it's a Neolithic city that was used for nearly 2,000 years before completely being abandoned in around 5700 BC. Unlike traditional cities with streets and open spaces, though, Çatalhöyük was a cluster of connected mud brick houses, with residents moving from one to another by walking across rooftops and going through holes in ceilings. This layout makes it one of the most unusual and strange prehistoric settlements that have ever been discovered. The site was first excavated in the 1960s and immediately stood out because of the lack of visible roads or alleyways. Instead, homes were built directly against each other, with it seeming like people used ladders to enter and exit their buildings. The interiors of these structures suggest that they were relatively a sophisticated society, with rooms featuring wall paintings, reliefs, and sculptures, often depicting wild animals, hunting scenes, and the motif of a female figure who was possibly their mother goddess. Çatalhöyük's residents here cultivated wheat, barley, peas, and lentils. They also domesticated animals like sheep and goats. They were still hunter-gatherers too, with a diet that included wild animals like deer and boar. And the city's location near the Konya Plain provided fertile soil and access to water, making it an ideal place for early farming. Trade also appeared to have been important, with obsidian being one of their most valuable commodities, which was likely in exchange with other communities in the region. Despite its size, though, it was home to an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 people at its peak. Excavations here haven't found any signs of government, palaces, or temples. This has led archaeologists to think that the society may have been egalitarian, with no class divisions, and this is something that's supported by uniformity of the house sizes. But without written records, and with the site being so ancient, we won't know very much about the people who lived there, their beliefs, or most importantly, why the city was suddenly abandoned after being successful for so long. With larger, more complex cities developing in Mesopotamia and Anatolia, did the people of Çatalhöyük join, or even lead those societies, or did something else entirely different happen to them? Moving on to number 7, the stone spheres of Costa Rica. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, it's also known as bolas de piedra, or Diquis spheres, are a series of nearly perfect spherical stones, ranging in size from a few inches to over 8 feet. Believed to have been created by the indigenous Diquis culture between the years 600 and 1500 AD, some of them weigh as much as 16 tons. These spheres were first investigated in the 1930s, and since then over 300 have been discovered, with many of them having now been removed from their original locations and relocated to private gardens, museums, and public spaces. What's most surprising about them is their incredible precision, as the people who made them managed to create nearly perfect spheres without modern tools and techniques. They're all mostly made from a hard igneous rock that's found in the nearby hills, and it's thought that the Diquis people used stone hammers and chisels to shape them, gradually smoothing them through what would have been a long process. Some of the smaller spheres may have been polished using sand and water, but the exact methods used to achieve such a level of perfection are still unclear. Their purpose, too, is also unknown, with the leading theory being that they were status symbols that were used to mark the territories of powerful leaders or used in ceremonial practices. It is possible, too, that they were aligned with astronomical events, as some of the spheres appear to have been placed in specific arrangements, possibly as an early form of celestial observation. Since their discovery, countless myths and legends have been told about them, with some local stories claiming that they were created by the gods or they hold hidden treasures inside. The Diquis culture, however, has already mysteriously vanished before the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century, and they left very little behind in terms of written records or oral traditions. Without further discoveries, we may never fully know the truth behind these stones. Number 6. Pumapunku in Bolivia. Pumapunku, which is an archaeological site in western Bolivia, dates back at least 1,500 years. It's a megalithic complex that's become known for its stonework and massive blocks of andesite and sandstone, and advanced construction techniques. With a name that means Gate of the Puma in the Aymara language, this was once a hugely important ceremonial and political center of the Tiwanaku civilization from the year 300 to 1000 AD. The Tiwanaku people were highly skilled in engineering and stonemasonry, but the scale and precision of Pumapunku made it very different from other sites in the area. Pumapunku contains megalithic blocks that were precisely shaped and fitted together without mortar, creating a huge block puzzle that researchers have been trying to solve ever since. The size of the blocks is unbelievable for the time, with some weighing over 100 tons. They were somehow transported from quarries at least 6 miles away, with some coming from even further away. And just the logistics of doing this is a mystery, especially as no evidence has been found of the civilization having access to the wheel, metal tools, or large domesticated land animals to help. Some of the most famous elements here are the H-shaped blocks, which are fit together in a modular way, and they're all so similar that it's almost like they were mass-produced. But exactly how this was possible remains unknown. To try to explain this, people have suggested a combination of stone tools, sand abrasion, and fire to cut the stones. But it's also possible that the Tiwanaku people had access to technologies that have been since lost to time. By around the year 1000, the Tiwanaku civilization had completely collapsed, and that was likely due to droughts, social change, and a changing climate that made agriculture less productive. Pumapunku was abandoned, and over time, many of its stones were stolen or repurposed by later cultures, including the Incas and Spanish colonizers. Earthquakes and natural erosion have also led to the decline of the site, meaning that what's left is just a fraction of what was originally there, and any clues that were once there about its purpose are likely long gone. Number 5. The Sphinx, Egypt. The Great Sphinx of Giza is one of the most famous monuments of ancient Egypt and in the entire ancient world. It's found on the Giza Plateau next to the Great Pyramids. This is a huge limestone statue that represents a mythical creature with the body of a lion and the head of a human, and is believed to be designed in the image of Pharaoh Khafre, who ruled Egypt around 4,500 years ago. At 240 feet long, 62 feet wide, and 66 feet high, it's the largest monolithic statue in the world and was carved directly into the natural limestone bedrock. The leading theory among Egyptologists is that the Sphinx was built during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, around 2500 BCE, under the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. Although this is by no means certain, it's a theory that's based on the closeness of the statue to Khafre's pyramid and the stylistic similarities between the Sphinx's face and statues that we know are of the pharaoh. Further complicating things, though, is how it was constructed. The statue was carved from a single piece of massive limestone outcrop, which was already on the Giza Plateau. Some geologists and researchers think that the weathering patterns on the Sphinx's body could only be possible by exposure to prolonged periods of heavy rainfall, which would date its construction to a much earlier time, as much as 7,000 to 10,000 years ago, which would predate ancient Egypt as we know it. As for its purpose, the Sphinx is widely believed to have been a guardian figure protecting Giza. A combination of a human head and a lion's body symbolizes intelligence and strength, and in ancient Egyptian mythology, the Sphinx may have been associated with the sun god Ra. It's also possible that it was an astronomical marker, aligning with celestial events. The Sphinx, as we see today, of course, is very different from how it was originally, which makes it trickier to unlock the mysteries surrounding it. Its missing nose, for example, is probably the result of purposeful damage at some point between the 13th and 16th centuries, but no records can prove this. It also had a beard, parts of which are housed in the British Museum, but this was probably added during a later period, at least 1,000 years after it was first built. There are also theories, which have been backed up by radar scans, that there may be a series of hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx, which, if they're ever explored, could reveal once and for all what it was, and possibly many other forgotten Egyptian secrets. Number 4. The Olmec Colossal Heads in Mexico. The Olmec Colossal Heads. They're some of the most incredible artifacts from Mesoamerican history. They're a set of gigantic stone sculptures that were carved by the Olmec civilization who lived in present-day Mexico from around 1500 to 400 BC. The enormous structures range in height from 5 to 11 feet, and they weigh between 6 to 50 tons, and they were carved from large basalt boulders to depict facial features, suggesting that they represent individual rulers or important figures of Olmec society. The first of them were found in the 19th century, but their importance wasn't fully realized until the early 20th, during a series of excavations at Olmec sites in the 1930s and 40s. Since then, a total of 17 colossal heads have been found, mainly at 4 major Olmec sites: San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and Rancho La Cubata, all of which are in the Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco. San Lorenzo, which is one of the oldest and most significant Olmec places, has 10 of these colossal heads. La Venta has 4, Tres Zapotes has 2, and Rancho La Cubata has 1, which is unique in that it's unfinished. The heads were carved using stone tools, and some of them still have visible tool marks along them, with traces of red paint, which suggests that they were originally brightly colored. Each of the heads has distinct facial features, with thick lips, broad noses, and cheekbones, and some have headgear resembling helmets or caps, possibly indicating the person's status. And this means that each one is unique and individual, which is why it's thought that they were meant to represent specific Olmec rulers rather than being generic depictions of gods. The level of realism here too suggests that the Olmecs had a well-developed artistic tradition capable of capturing the unique likenesses of important people. Their exact purpose remains uncertain, though, with the most likely theory being that they were representations of powerful rulers and were placed in prominent ceremonial and political centers to project power. They could have also been markers of Olmec territorial control, signaling the presence of a ruling dynasty in different regions. The deliberate burial or relocation of some heads suggests that they may have been ritually decommissioned or repositioned in response to shifts in political power. Number 3. The Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. The Great Serpent Mound in Adams County, Ohio, is an amazing ancient earthwork in North America. At around 1,340 feet long and varying between 3 to 6 feet high, it's a giant effigy mound that represents a serpent with a coiled tail and an open mouth, seemingly about to swallow an oval-shaped object. The purpose, builders, and exact age of this serpent mound, however, remain the subject of debate. Currently, it's believed that it was created by one of two prehistoric cultures, the Adena culture, which was in the region between 1000 BC to 200 AD, and the Fort Ancient culture, which was there between 1000 and 1650 AD. Early excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries associate the mound with the Adena culture due to nearby sites containing artifacts. But recent radiocarbon dating of charcoal found in the area suggests construction date of around 1070 AD, making it more than likely that it was the Fort Ancient culture. It is possible, too, that the mound may have originally been built by the Adena and then later modified by the Fort Ancient peoples. Its purpose, therefore, remains mysterious, but evidence does suggest that it may have had astronomical, religious, or ceremonial significance. One of the most convincing theories about this is that it was designed as an astronomical observatory. The serpent's head lines up with the summer solstice sunset, while the curves of its body seem to correspond with the positions of the moon and various planetary alignments. Some believed it represents the sun, reinforcing the idea of solar worship. Another theory is that it represents a swallowed object, perhaps illustrating the story from Native American mythology. The Great Serpent Mound could represent the horned serpent, a common figure in indigenous cosmology and one that's often linked to creation, chaos, or transformation. Building the mound would have been quite the challenge and commitment for the time, as the earthwork was formed by layering clay and ash over a limestone base, then covering it with soil to form its shape. It's another that, without written records, we'll probably never know, and for certain its exact purpose, but in many ways the various theories about it make it even more special and show how important the lands have been to local cultures for thousands of years. Number 2. Nan Madol, Pohnpei. Of all the ancient cities that have been found, it's possibly Nan Madol that tops the list as being the most mysterious. Found on the island of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia, it's made up of a series of artificial stone islets, which are connected by canals and surround a lagoon, leading to it being known as the Venice of the Pacific. Covering an area of about half a square mile and featuring more than 90 artificial islets, the foundations were made up of stones that in some cases weigh up to 50 tons. These basalt logs were carefully arranged in a crisscross pattern, forming walls as high as 25 feet and up to 15 feet thick. The foundation of each islet was created by layering coral and stone, providing a stable base for the structures, and the entire complex was built over a coral reef, which is all the more impressive considering it was built on waterlogged terrain. How the builders transported these columns is unknown, with theories including that they used rafts, canoes, or bamboo rollers, and the oral traditions of Pohnpei even describe the use of supernatural powers. Becoming the capital of the Sodalere rulers who once established the first centralized societies in the Pacific, this wasn't just a city, but a religious and political center where nobles, priests, and leading families lived under the rule of the dynasty. Commoners were not allowed to live in the city, but they were required to bring food and supplies to sustain those who were there. Nan Madol thrived for centuries, but by the early 17th century, the Sodalere dynasty collapsed and the city was abandoned. According to legend, the last Sodalere ruler was overthrown by a warrior who led a rebellion against the oppressive regime. This then saw the rise of the non-monarchy system, which was a more decentralized form of governance that still continues to influence Pohnpeian society today. There's still a huge amount of superstition surrounding the ruins, though, with them being seen as cursed by locals. And quite why the city was completely abandoned isn't clear, and without any written accounts, all that's left are stories that have been passed down over generations. These don't, though, detail actual events and have a spiritual element to them, so we'll probably never know what life was truly like in the city, how it was actually built, and what led to the downfall of this civilization. Number 1. Stonehenge, England. Stonehenge is undoubtedly one of the most famous prehistoric monuments anywhere on the planet. It's located in Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England. This megalithic structure was built in several phases between 3100 BC and 1600 BC, and it's made up of a massive circle of standing stones, some weighing up to 25 tons and reaching 30 feet tall. The earliest phase of the site dates back to around 3100 BC, when a circular ditch and bank known as the Henge were dug, surrounding an area of about 360 feet in diameter. Inside this enclosure, archaeologists found aubrey holes, which may have originally held wooden posts or stones. It was only around 500 years later that the first large stones were brought in, which were blue stones from the Preseli Hills in Wales, which is over 150 miles away. Weighing between 2 to 4 tons, they were arranged in an early form of the monument. This phase turned into what we know today, though, probably happened after another 500 years, and it's when the giant sarsen stones were installed. These were likely quarried from Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles away. These enormous sandstone blocks were arranged into a circular pattern, with some forming the pairs of vertical stones topped by a horizontal lintel stone. Now, how the Neolithic builders were able to transport these stones without wheels or advanced tools remain one of their greatest mysteries, with theories being that they were dragged on wooden sledges over greased wooden rollers or carried on rafts over the rivers. The precise placement of the stones, too, took great skill, and advanced carpentry techniques were needed to secure the stones together, which seems well ahead of what was being done elsewhere at the time. The other big mystery is its purpose. It's long been known that there's an astronomical significance to the site, as it aligns with the movements of the sun and moon, particularly during the summer and winter solstices. On Midsummer's Day, the sun rises directly above the heel stone, which is an outlying monolith on the outside of the main circle, and during the winter solstice, the sun sets in perfect alignment with the central stones. But in modern times, Druids and other pagan spiritual traditions have become closely associated with Stonehenge. But the Druids, which are a priestly class of the Celtic peoples, didn't exist until well over 1,000 years after Stonehenge was completed. So while it certainly became an important place to them, it still is to this day. They weren't the original builders. In fact, the monument has been built there in 3 distinct stages. Experts are now beginning to consider the site as 3 different structures, Stonehenges 1, 2, and 3, which were each overseen by different groups of people. What's there today, then, is a reconstruction with the original stones based on images that have been drawn before this happened. With it likely been used in so many different ways over thousands of years that's been there, it's likely that many of the clues that would have hinted to how it was originally built and the reasons for it in the first place are now long gone. But it's a place that's been so important to so many cultures through history that the original intent is almost no longer relevant. Click here to watch our previous video on the top 15 most amazing ancient cities. Thank you to our channel members.